Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. It is still a little bit before the beginning of our 1 o'clock Eastern Time webinar on the 4 elements of the publishing ROI. I want to give you a chance to get settled and get ready for this afternoon's session. I'm looking forward to this particular panel of experts. They have been sharing this information with other organizations and others in the publishing field, so they know what they're doing. They know what they're talking about. And as you get settled and we get ready to go, let me welcome you. It's 1 o'clock by my clock, so that's the one we use. So we're going to move ahead. My name is Therese Brown. For those of you who have not met, I am the executive director of the Association of Catholic Publishers, and I'm very excited for you all to be here today to interact with these 3 experts in the publishing field. They can share some of the information that they have gleaned in their experience and hopefully help you move forward in the work that you're doing. A couple of housekeeping things to note. We will have questions and answers at the end of this session. Those who are participating, you have 2 ways in which you can share your thoughts and your questions. One is by the Q&A, the question feature, and the other is through the chat box. Please feel free to use those at any time. I will be monitoring those during the presentation, and we will get to them at the end. That is about the most important thing. The other second most important thing is that we are recording this session, and the session will be available at the ACP website under webinars shortly after the session is ended. It will also be available at the ACP YouTube channel, so you can find it in both those locations at any time to share that with your other colleagues or those who were not able to attend today. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Joshua, Richard, and David. Let them introduce themselves to you. If you have any need or questions for me, please use the chat box and I will be happy to respond. Thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you at the end of the session.
Therese, thank you so much for introducing us and to ACP for hosting us today. So hello and welcome. Today we have Firebrand Technologies, Metacomet, and IPG here, along with commentary from a publisher called Central Avenue Publishing, who unfortunately was not able to join us today. We're going to delve into the return on investment to be found in adopting powerful publishing tools and best practices. We'll examine 4 main aspects of ROI, which are time savings, cost reduction, increased sales, and risk mitigation. And we'll offer real-life examples and tactical recommendations of where publishers can increase their bottom line by continually refining their publishing processes. The decision to invest in software and systems can be daunting, and it may often seem easier to stick with the status quo. You will leave this 1-hour presentation with a better understanding of why and how you can further add value and ease to your process with tools that are designed specifically for this industry. So I'm going to introduce our panelists. David Marlin co-founded Metacomet Systems in 2000. David has been committed to enhancing the technological capabilities of the publishing world through his work as the founding co-chairman of the BISG Digital Sales Reporting Committee and a former co-chair of the BISG Rights Committee. David has an MBA from Columbia Business School. Joshua Talent is the Director of Sales and Education at Firebrand Technologies, where his focus is on helping publishers of all sizes learn about and find solutions to their workflow and metadata problems. Joshua's background is deeply rooted in ebook development, metadata, and other publishing technologies. He serves on the BISG Board of Directors and loves digging into interesting metadata issues. I am Richard T. Williams, the VP of Business Development at IPG, where I oversee new and existing business for the IPG distribution program, as well as for clients who are seeking extended publishing services and licensing opportunities. I'm a former sales manager at IPG, the former director of the Small Press United program, and I was once an operations manager at an independent publisher where I learned firsthand experience on the publishing side. And additionally, we will be sharing the perspective from Michelle Halkett, a bibliophile and technophile who loves to try new things, which is what prompted her to start a digital-first publishing company when very few knew what ebooks were. Central Avenue Publishing is now a traditional press of fiction and poetry, and unfortunately, Michelle is unable to participate today, but she has given us her blessing to share her experiences. So with that, we'd like to start the conversation with David from Metacomet for an introduction to the topic of return on investment.
Great. Thank you, Richard. So what is return on investment, or ROI? So back in business school, I first heard the term being used as a way to compare the value of various financial investments and decisions. And it has evolved over time to be a way to decide the value of any investment. If I invest or pay a certain amount in time and effort, what will I get in return? And as part of ROI, it's important to look beyond the strict financial costs and returns and also take into account the more subjective costs and returns. So as an example, let's take a look at gardening. So from a purely financial point of view of ROI, in order to get started with a gardening project, I'll need to purchase seeds, seed beds, fertilizer, soil, and any other tools and materials I may need. And in return, I'll get lots of fresh vegetables, maybe worth a couple $100. So when you look at the financial return, you can ask yourself, was it worth? You can look directly, was it worth? Did I get out of this in terms of the value of my veggies, what I put into it? But then there's also the non-monetary aspects of ROI. And so when I'm looking at my gardening, in terms of the cost side, how much time and energy did I have to put into this? How much effort did I put in weeding it and watering it? So that's an intangible cost. There's not a direct cost to my free time. But there's also a lot of intangible benefits. So for instance, by going out there and gardening regularly, I'm able to achieve a certain feeling of satisfaction and seeing the results of my efforts, a level of relaxation by taking my mind off all the craziness of the world and focusing on this task. And also, the benefit of family time, because every once in a while I can get the kids and my wife involved, and there's a lot of value in that. So in some ways, we all use ROI every day to make our decisions. And again, we don't always use quantifiable numbers because they're just not readily available all the time, but we use the concept. And again, there's the financial, the direct objective numbers. So for instance, if I decide to buy an electric car, I can look at the cost of the car versus how much I'm going to save in gas, how much I'm going to save in maintenance. And I have this experience because I recently bought my second electric car. But also there's the intangible benefit. What will I gain in terms of feeling better about trying to do my part to reduce global warming? So we also need to factor in the potential downsides of investment. So if I decide I'm in Southern California or Hawaii, and I really want to go surfing, and I'm only there for a few days, but there's a shark warning out there, and the waters are infested with sharks. Well, what is my return on investment if I still decide to go surfing? And certainly I'll have the positive benefits of the excitement and the adrenaline rush, but what's the risk that I'll need limb replacement surgery, and what's the cost of that risk? So when it comes time to evaluating ROI, business decisions for publishers, there are really four particular components of ROI that we should focus on. So there's the time savings piece, and this piece is quantifiable. So there's how much time do you spend doing what you might be able to otherwise automate or delegate. How much and what's the value of that cost of that time? What's how do you value your time? There's the and of course time savings all often directly correlate to the next element of ROI, which is cost savings. So a couple of examples here when it comes to publishers. So perhaps if you invest in a new system, you won't need to you can refrain from hiring someone that you might otherwise need. So I see this all the time in royalties. A number of our customers are using outside accountants or consultants, or have a part-time person helping them with royalties. And if they're able to automate that, they no longer need to invest in that resource. And also there's the, you know, a lot of, we see a lot of people who have some kind of a custom, you know, program they might have built 10, 15 years ago, and they have a developer that they need to support or continue to pay to support that system. So there's the cost reduction side. On the increasing sales side, what added revenue can you gain with those freed up resources or from the benefits that these various investments might provide? You know, one example is moving from a reactive way of thinking about the world to a proactive way, where maybe you're going from just barely getting your metadata up onto various sites, as Josh will talk about later, to leveraging your metadata when you implement a new system. And then finally, there's the risk mitigation piece. And this part's, again, one of those subjective ones. It's really hard to monetize risk. In business school, they teach you, and in the finance world, there's this concept called the beta. And it's basically a percentage that you tack on to try and monetize risk. But in reality, you know, you don't ever really understand all the risks you're dealing with. There's just so many uncertainties in life. But you do appreciate that there are risks there, and you can sense what they could be. So going back to royalties, for example, if you mess up your royalties, how much is that going to cost you in terms of author relationships, financial penalties, reputational penalties? How much effort are you going to have to spend dealing with that mess up? What if you need to hire a PR firm to help fix your reputation? So those are the four basic elements of ROI that we're going to be looking at today, that Richard, Joshua, and I will be looking at today. And to get us started, we'd like to offer Michelle's experience with publishing investments and their return. So, so Central Avenue is a press of fiction and poetry. They have about 15 to 18 titles per year that they're putting out. Michelle is the publisher. She doesn't have any full-time employees. She regularly uses freelancers and consultants, but she does a lot of it by herself. Her reason for participating in this webinar originally was because of what she learned in being forced to analyze her returns in the four areas that I just described, like figuring out what her time was worth, and how to value that time. So we'll be sharing the benefits that she realized today in making these various investments, and hopes that this this perspective will help you get to a point of implementing tools sooner than she will acknowledge that she did. Because in retrospect, she's told us all several times that she wishes she had done some of these things earlier than she did. So with that, let's start with looking at distribution. And for that, we will turn to Richard.
Great, thanks, David. So look, the big savings when, I'm going to start with time savings, and the big savings when contracting with a distributor is that for a percentage of your overall sales revenue, you get a staff working for you. So, you know, you have the warehouse to pick, pack, and ship, so you aren't doing it out of your basement or garage. You have an operations staff to process orders, so you aren't typing everything yourself into a spreadsheet or database and printing out handmade invoices. You have accounting folks to bill and collect the accounts that you're working with. There are more people. We have salespeople to push your brand and product to accounts, marketing people to help push your brand and product to tastemakers and consumers, publicists to push your brand and product to the media, and then, you know, tons more people. We have metadata experts to massage your categories, your keywords, your pricing, and your basic book specs, title development experts to help you package and position for your market, and this one cannot be overstated, an executive management team with something like 5,000 collective years of experience in negotiating business and publishing books.
I have to say, just to interrupt here for a second, Richard, I love your stock photos, but according to these, book distribution people have to be the happiest people on earth.
Thank you, Joshua, and we are. All of this is to say that the biggest way that a distributor can help you is by allowing your program to be handled by multiple groups of experts in a variety of ways, all simultaneously. This frees up your resources to apply to other areas of publishing, such as design, editorial, production, or if you're an author, the writing. Basically, you should be focusing on what you do best. But don't just take my word for it. I'm going to use Michelle as an example. Michelle had this to say about the time she saved by signing with a distributor. Before traditional distribution, I was using Lightning Source POD, so I didn't have to manage my own warehouse or invoicing. That said, I still had many instances of following up on orders, as well as storing a cache of marketing copies in my garage that I'd have to manage. I was spending time on sales, trying to reach and sell to buyers. My time savings just from those tasks is about 10 hours per month. So with that, I'm going to move on to cost reduction. And this is all about the economics of scale. A distributor conglomerates your list with other lists, allowing us to become a super vendor to the industry and achieving better overall business terms. So as a case in point, I wanted to compare publisher data for a publisher similar to Central Avenue to distributor data for a publisher similar to IPG, showing the difference between the number of print titles, the number of ebooks, and the number of units shipped in a year. In this case, maybe 2021, where an uptick in ebook sales occurred due to the ongoing impact of the pandemic. So based on these numbers, if we don't get better discounts from accounts due to the volume that we sell, or better freight costs from trucking companies and couriers for the volumes that we ship, then there would be no point in our business. Even the raw number of ebooks we aggregate and provide to our trading partners allows us to accomplish financial advantages that aren't available to publishers who have to forge independent relationships and or settle for one-size-fits-all rates on self-service platforms. So these savings, which differ depending on the distributor's specific business terms, which often has to do with their size when they negotiated such terms, when compared directly might look simply like pennies here or there, but when amassed, they grant additional money that can be applied towards capital expenditures like office rental, computer equipment, or software upgrades, or even human resources. So consider how a sales manager at $75,000 annually or an administrative assistant at $40,000 would be expensive for a small business, especially when you add 20% on top of that to provide employment benefits. So Michelle had this to say: I think too that as a small business, I might not need a full-time sales manager, but now I have access to those people for whom their jobs are full-time careers. It's hard to talk about cost reduction when one moves to traditional distribution because it is expensive. That said, once I was able to move to using a warehouse, I could also move to much cheaper offset printing for my high volume titles. This represented a significant savings of about 80% on printing and freight that I could then apply to the cost of distribution. So the size of a distributor also means that we can subsidize the enormous expense of such services as NPD BookScan and Edelweiss, granting our clients access to these services at no extra cost. But our size doesn't simply boost the economy of our service. It also allows us to have reach into areas that a small publisher may not be able to reach on their own. One of the more common vendors that smaller publishers come to us to access is Barnes & Noble. So this point is related to, and thus moves us into, increased sales. So some of you might be looking at this picture of B. Dalton and kind of sighing nostalgically like I do. I'm going to tell you the IPG story. 50 years ago, IPG was founded with the creation of an independent publishing company called Chicago Review Press. The advent of the chain bookstores popping up in shopping malls like this B. Dalton in the late 70s and early 80s became an obstacle because independent vendors were not invited to sell their product to these soon massive institutions. This was simply because operationally, the chains could not manage the direct business with so many different and relatively smaller customers. CRP, Chicago Review Press, simply could not get a seat at the table, so to speak, to make a sales presentation. So our founders eventually made a connection with a group of publishers who were strategically banding together to increase their station in such a market. And after an acquisition, CRP now had a built-in distribution arm and therefore exceeded the imposed limit on vendor size. In addition to simply acquiring the ability to make a sales presentation, a publisher also has to have the support of a known entity in order to best market its titles. This is often because no publicist or reviewer wants to give bandwidth to a title that may be hard to get, fall out of circulation, or belong to a publisher who closes its doors before it even gets off the ground. And even if a publisher is invited to make a sales presentation and can get the marketing resources to raise awareness of its products on a national level, having creative types who write and produce books also get forced into roles as sales and business people can be utterly detrimental to the development of a good publishing line. So when I asked Michelle what sales advantages she gained when signing with IPG, this is what she had to say. This is truly where the rubber hit the road, and it represented a quantum leap in sales. Almost overnight, IPG found opportunities I didn't even know existed, and in the next year, my sales tripled. And that was without new titles. That was just backlist. Even better, when it came to frontlist, the titles I publish now had a sales team actively selling and advocating for them to the trade. Before, it was just a wait and see situation where I would release a title and cross my fingers, hoping the algorithms would find it and show it to consumers. Plus, many bookstores won't stock books that are POD only, and I no longer had that issue since all my books, regardless of how they're printed, all appeared as in stock. All right, so now I'm going to move on to the mitigation of risk. And I'm going to talk very strictly about 3 points: labor, credit risk, and cash flow. So rising labor costs. When you sign to a distributor, you lock in at rates that do not necessarily change when other costs of living and doing business increase. When our rent increases, your rate stays the same. When Illinois minimum wage increases by $5 over a few short years, we take the hit, not our clients who would have to adjust their businesses to afford their support staff. And as white collar workers have gone to a work from home environment over the course of the pandemic, companies have had to support tax and hiring laws across multiple states. We basically eat those expenses on behalf of our clients. Credit risk, it's all about aversion. With some exceptions, such as the big national accounts, IPG takes the credit risk. A bookstore or a wholesaler has much more to lose if they cannot pay a major book supplier. Of course, if a major vendor, such as Barnes & Noble defaults, or in fact Borders, which did back in the early 2010s, IPG can't completely protect you from that loss, but for smaller vendors like an independent bookstore, you are absolutely protected. Finally, the mitigation of cash flow risks. Your cash flow chokes when success requires reprinting suddenly that can drain a publisher's bank account quickly, and the cash flow from a distributor comes from a bigger pool of resources. This is sort of a real simple example, but here I'm showcasing how a staggered payment structure guarantees consistent cash flow payout in the case of sales that are gradually dwindling or returns that are steadily increasing. So because the reserve is taken when sales are high, that reserve is paid back later when sales are lower and returns are higher, helping to compensate for what otherwise would have been a negative month. Michelle said that she realized this value early in the pandemic when she heard through the industry grapevine that certain customers weren't able to pay their bills. That risk wasn't passed on to her, and she got paid on schedule. Shipments continued, and her cash flow was for the most part preserved. Okay, so to summarize Michelle's case, she's now saving about 120 hours a year. Her print costs are significantly reduced. She experienced a massive increase in sales, and her cash flow has been evened out in rough times. We really appreciate Michelle's firsthand experience, as well as the rest of you, for hearing about the return on investment of signing with a distributor. So we'll now move on to royalty management, and I'll hand the reins back over to David.
Thank you, Richard. So let's start again. We're going to look at the four elements of ROI when it comes to royalty management, and let's start with time savings and the corresponding value of automation, of automating your royalties. So I'm gonna just start this with a little story. This is just so vivid in my mind because it was just such a great atmosphere and a great story. We were sitting with a customer of ours in Colorado Springs. I was having lunch in this country club with this gorgeous, enormous floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the mountains of Colorado. It was just such a memorable experience, and I was talking to the CEO and one of his top people about royalties, and they were telling me how before automating their royalties, they were spending 2 months every 6 months doing nothing but royalties, and they had multiple people focused full time on just getting these royalties out the door. So every 6 months they had that dread of royalties approaching. And royalties are just time consuming to get right. It's complex calculations. There's balances to carry forward from period to period, and it just takes a lot of time. So what is the value of that time? You know, and in my experience, most people tend to undervalue the cost of their time. But you know, when you're looking at that value, you really have to look a lot at, you know, the opportunity costs. You know, what else could you, not only what does that resource cost, but what else could that resource be doing? And there's a cost associated with that. Um, so when it comes to the cost reduction piece, again, it's very related, directly correlated in large part to time savings. And there's again the savings of resources, but many publishers and customers we work with had some level of outsourcing for their royalties. They had accounting firms that were doing it, they had specialized consultants that were doing it for them, or they had developers that were supporting a Band-Aid patched up homegrown system. And so by automating royalties, publishers often find themselves not needing to hire someone that they may otherwise need to hire, or not needing to outsource. So there's that cost reduction element there. The next aspect of ROI, again, is the increased sales piece. And for this, I'd like to go back to that Colorado publisher. The person who is leading the royalty charge every 6 months, she was a critical resource for the CEO. She took a lot off the CEO's plate. She, you know, she had strategic responsibilities, and during those 2 months, she was not able to do any of that, and the CEO had to essentially go down a level to get very tactical to handle some of the things that she would otherwise be doing. And so that was 4 months every year that the CEO now has earned back in terms of their ability to build the business, you know, go out and develop relationships, because this key resource that they had has now been freed up. So they can focus on growing their business instead of dealing with this royalty challenge that was really sucking up a lot of their time. So the last piece of ROI is the risk mitigation. And here's a picture of a safety net, and that's because really by automating your royalties and investing in a royalty system, you're giving yourself a safety net to prevent a lot of damage that can conceivably happen to your business. So another story, we had this customer several years ago reach out to us. A couple thousand titles, and they had not been able to pay their royalties for a long time. They were way behind on royalties. They were just overwhelmed. The whole idea of doing royalties was just too overwhelming for them. Successful publisher, profitable, earning money, but just not able to get their royalties done. And this is a really sad story, because that customer eventually went into receivership, and an accounting firm had to take over, an outside accounting firm had to take over their royalties. And so basically, the publisher essentially lost her business because of that. So that's a somewhat extreme example, but royalties, you know, not getting your royalties right, there's a lot of risks there. I talked in the beginning about reputational risks with your authors and within the industry. Also, you know, when we talk about risks and royalties, it's often very directly correlated with stress. And going back to that Colorado publisher, imagine the stress. You know, they have to start working on their royalties maybe in January. So imagine the stress as Christmas is approaching, knowing that right after the Christmas holiday, they're going to have to dive back into this awful process. And that can all be mitigated, again, with automating your royalties. So in conclusion, you know, when you're looking at the ROI of investing in a royalty system, you know, look at how much you're going to save in terms of those valuable resources and the associated costs of those resources, what kind of free time you're going to get, how you're going to be able to mitigate and manage your risks by having just confidence that your results are accurate, and that you're going to get everything out on time, and share it in a way that's going to make your authors happy. So now we'll just take a look at what Michelle shared to us about with us about her experience having automated royalties, and the return on investment that she experienced. So prior to moving to Metacomet, Michelle was using a combination of accounting software, spreadsheets, and a calculator to create her royalty statement. It used to take her 2 full days every quarter back when she only had 40 books. Now she has 3 times as many books as that, and it only takes her a few hours every quarter. So Michelle estimates that she probably saves about 72 hours a year just through royalty automation. With respect to the cost savings and the sales, the increased sales aspect of ROI, while it's hard for her to quantify the impact, she says that with her newly available time, she's been able to focus more on tasks that do make her money, like acquisitions and marketing, which has in turn improved, again, in a not very directly quantifiable way, but in a way that she's confident has improved her revenue. When it comes to the risk aspect of ROI and how she was helped in that when investing in a royalty system, she says that risk avoidance was likely the biggest ROI for Central Avenue. My previous workflow caused me a ton of stress as my company was growing, adding licensing and more books. I would stress for the few weeks before I had to calculate them, worried I wasn't entering data correctly or that my manual calculations wouldn't stand up to scrutiny. Michelle tells us now that she just presses a few buttons each month and each quarter to send out scores of royalty statements, which means her business is scalable because adding new books doesn't really increase her workload at all. So now that we've discussed the ROI of automating your royalties and investing in a royalty automation solution, let's now hand it off to Joshua to discuss the ROI of metadata management.
Yeah, thank you very much, David. So yeah, I'd like to talk about the ROI that you can find when you implement a professional metadata management system. But to set the context for that, I'd like to share a couple of observations that I've had when I've been talking to publishers over the years who struggle with their metadata. I usually see one of 4 situations that I'm going to walk through real quick. And the first is the nobody knows situation. This is a publisher that doesn't have a handle on any metadata for any title, except possibly the ones they're working on right this moment. There may have been some documents somewhere in the past. There might have been something in an old hard drive or a zip disk or something. But if they needed to pull together all of their data into one place, it would essentially require copying and pasting from Amazon and then making up a bunch of data from scratch. The second type of publisher I run into pretty often is the distributor has it. This publisher has a distributor and relies on that service provider for all of their metadata management. So the problem here is not the distributor. The problem is actually that internally, they don't have a consistent system to place all their metadata in or to handle all the details in. And this situation kind of usually means that they have to log into a portal somewhere and manually submit metadata to the distributor when the title is about to be announced. And then all too often, updates to the metadata require a completely separate process, sometimes even submissions of changes via email with just the hope that the change is going to be implemented at some point in the future. And I have to say, I have nothing against distributors at all, as Richard can attest to. But this is the kind of metadata management that's really not best for the publisher. So I strongly believe that publishers should have control over their own metadata internally, if for no other reason than it just allows you to more easily deliver that data to your distributor. And also makes the distributor's job easier because then they can handle data feeds coming from you directly instead of having to have different portals and different ways of processing data. But having that internal control offers a lot of other benefits to the company as well, including the freedom to move to a better distributor like IPG when the time comes to upgrade your game on the distribution front. The third kind of publisher I run into is the I can do it all myself publisher. This is usually the one that's tasked a certain person with the manual metadata management process and the delivery of their data, usually in Excel, sometimes even in Onyx, out to their trading partners. Now, this is not usually the result of some sort of well thought out process and workflow. It's often just the natural result of changing needs. As a company grows, the decisions made to bring the metadata management in-house or to start doing doing something to manage the data more appropriately. So somebody creates a spreadsheet. Sometimes a few different spreadsheets are created with different pieces of data in them. And often this is a workflow spreadsheet that's being used for project tracking. It's not just for the data, but it's also the whole schedule, along with different documents and spreadsheets and Word docs and whatever else that contain a bunch of other things that may not be in that specific tracking spreadsheet, like book descriptions. And then over time, there's one person who just kind of naturally takes on the role of managing the data. Sometimes it's an editorial assistant or an intern who then is hired full time because that person became so important to the operations of the business. And then sometimes even the sales manager. I've seen sales managers who are doing this kind of work, manual labor stuff, and this person can spend up to 10 or 20 hours every single week just managing different metadata files. They'll update the master spreadsheet. They'll get information from other departments and people and documents and create 10 or 15 different spreadsheets and other files for all of the different trading partners they need to send data to. And then they'll go and manually load those spreadsheets into partner FTP sites or fill out forms on websites. And the process is constant. It just requires at least half of this person's time every week, if not more.
Joshua, I'm going to interrupt you real quick just to comment on your stock photos now, because this publisher's problem is really that she just bought binders that are way too big for the amount of paper that she has, and not to mention the length of her arms.
Yeah, definitely could be more efficient with that.
And one more thing, that picture that you showed of the warehouse, that was from Raiders of the Lost Ark, right? That is not the IPG warehouse.
Not the IPG warehouse, yeah. All right, the fourth type of publisher that I run into is the homegrown solution, or the homebrew solution. Now, homebrew can mean different things to different people. For some of you, homebrew looks like water that's been perfectly heated at 200 degrees in an antique teapot, poured over 25 grams of hand-ground coffee, resulting in a cup of coffee that has subtle nuances of just having way too much time on your hands. And then for other people, homebrew looks more like a highly technical, often inconsistent, and occasionally rewarding process that just as often results in vinegar as it does in actual drinkable product on the far side. So, but whatever homebrew means to you, there are a lot of publishers who have created homebrew metadata management systems similar to what David was talking about earlier about homebrew royalty systems. This publisher is often a variant of, or even an extension of, that I can do it myself publisher. They saw the need for a solution to their metadata problems, but they decided that the best way to fix it was not to put everything into spreadsheets because databases are better. So they set up some sort of Airtable system or a FileMaker system, or they decided to go with some cheap Onyx creation program. However it was implemented, this publisher has obviously been using this system for a while, sometimes for the last few years or even decades, and they've created some sort of hodgepodge homebrew system that can create a spreadsheet or sometimes even output an Onyx file of some kind that they then manually upload to their partners. But the problem is this system still has its limitations. One of the biggest is what Michelle calls the "what if John wins the lottery" problem. Or what if John gets hit by a bus in the more common example. Another is the requirement that these publishers have to keep their custom solution up to date as the industry requirements needs change. So often that's at the expense of other company needs where that person's time and resources could be spent more effectively. And these publishers essentially become a software company, but without the time or the resources to really develop the best solutions to all of those constantly changing rigors of the metadata supply chain. Now, when we first started working with Central Avenue Publishing a couple of years ago, they were kind of a mashup of these three different or four different approaches. And that's really not uncommon. All of these different types of publishers have unique challenges, but in each case, the move to a professional metadata management system offers some very clear benefits over the current solutions that you might be dealing with yourself in-house. Okay, so now that we've got that baseline, let's talk about some ROI changes that come with a professional metadata management system. The first is time savings. For most publishers, the time that's spent on metadata is often spent doing the wrong things because you don't have a professional solution in place to create the metadata that you're sending out and getting it where it needs to go. So as I described those four publisher types, you probably heard some of the time sinks that are involved in those different processes, having to recreate data that was lost, usually by copying and pasting it from different places like retailer websites. manually entering data into different retailer portals or distributor portals, sending a distributor an email for every single metadata change that needs to be made, and then manually tracking the status of those changes if they're even being tracked at all. Managing different metadata elements in a bunch of different spreadsheets and Word documents and all these other places, maintaining all of your data in some sort of master spreadsheet when really Excel wasn't intended for that, and you have to scroll right and left and up and down and try to find stuff, and it's just not made for that purpose. And then copying and then adapting and putting that spreadsheet into different formats to meet the needs of all the different partners that you're sending data to, or manually uploading spreadsheets and Onyx files. Like, all of these things are time sinks. The thing is, implementing a modern professional metadata management solution is a powerful time saver. These different systems, these professional systems, will provide you lots of extra time by eliminating duplicate data entry, centralizing your data into one place, and allowing easier delivery of your data where it needs to go without you having to do a lot of work. And much of this comes down to opportunity cost. What could your metadata manager do if they freed up 10 hours or 20 hours a week? Saving yourself time messing with files and doing manual data entry and copying and pasting from one place to another and other time-consuming tasks is really a great way to give yourself time to work on other more important tasks, like watching your titles in the marketplace or creating new metadata or updating old product pages or marketing your products. For Michelle, the main goals with moving to a professional metadata management system were really to save time and to make sure that Central Avenue's product data was as good as it could be. Michelle wanted to scale her business, and that means speaking the language of the industry, which is Onyx, not paper, not spreadsheets. And since Central Avenue moved into Eloquence on Demand, a Firebrand product, Michelle has saved about 120 hours a year. That's 10 hours every single month, and that's only with a dozen titles or so a year and 100 in the backlist. All she has to do is make the metadata changes that she wants to make, knowing that the Onyx feed is going to go out to IPG every night and then from them out into the world. The second element of ROI that we've been talking about is this cost reduction idea. And this is another area where opportunity cost comes into play, because investing in a professional metadata management tool on top of your metadata manager's salary is obviously going to increase your monthly expenses. But that person's freedom to now focus on creating better data and increasing sales is where you're going to see a return on that investment. Publishers often have this idea in the back of their minds that metadata management tools aren't worth the investment. This is why so many metadata managers end up doing these processes manually. Their time is seen as expendable, and the desire to save a buck really keeps the company from investing in automation and higher quality tools. But it's important to remember that your metadata is your company's most valuable non-people asset. I'm not saying you should go overboard on the costs. I'm just saying that your metadata management costs are not the first place to try to save a buck. Your new costs and the related increase in available time are investments back into the business that can lead to increased sales. So let's talk about increasing sales. Multiple studies over the years have shown that there is a direct correlation between the quality of metadata that a publisher sends out and the sales of their books. As a general rule, among the best-selling titles in any given year, those titles with better metadata sell at least 50% more units than those without, and certain metadata elements like high-quality keywords and better book descriptions can make an even greater difference in sales. One of the smaller publishers that we work with took this process to heart, and they invested directly into their metadata management. They took advantage of both our metadata delivery service and our title performance monitoring service, and they spend all of their time savings on investing back into other areas like metadata quality improvements and increased marketing. And over the course of just 3 years, they almost tripled their revenue on Amazon without hiring a single new staff member. And that's part of the larger topic of risk mitigation too. So let's move on to risk mitigation. Reducing your risk is a key reason to take on the task of implementing a professional metadata management system and potentially a title performance monitoring system. As I mentioned earlier, many publishers put their entire workflow at risk by having one person manage their metadata using some sort of manual process. Reducing manual processes and increasing automation reduces your reliance on that one person and increases your flexibility as a company. So losing a metadata manager, either from them leaving the company or being promoted or winning the lottery, can cause a major disruption to any organization. But if you have automated processes and professional tools already in place, you're going to have some flexibility in finding a replacement for that person. There's also risk involved when you don't have your metadata under your own control. You really risk losing out on marketing opportunities, and you risk not being able to quickly deliver your data to new partners when those new partners come on board. You can also mitigate your risk by using a title performance monitoring tool to watch your titles in the marketplace and catch issues before they grow and before they become unmanageable. Now, in talking to Michelle about metadata management and the tools that she's using for that now, she didn't really realize how much time she was spending on metadata management until she really had that time back. And like I mentioned earlier, that's about 10 hours every month for her. There's no doubt that moving away from the free tools that she was using before represented a cost increase, but the small cost was worth it to her because she was saving time and headaches. Central Avenue sales have increased a lot in the last 18 months or so that they've been using Eloquence on Demand, but it's hard to really know how much of that is due to that one specific change. But with the time savings, Michelle has had a lot more brain space over the last year to work on increasing her data quality. And because she and her team can see all the metadata in one place, they have the ability to do that work effectively. And in turn, that increase in data quality has led to improvements in online discovery for her titles. Metadata updates that were just too difficult when there were 6 or 7 or 10 different spreadsheets to monitor are now something that can be done in just seconds. And then in terms of risk, Michelle now has the knowledge that all of her data is in one spot. It's backed up every night, and she knows that any change that she enters is automatically distributed out to IPG at night as well. So there's no remembering to send something, and saving that headspace is very highly valuable. So I'm going to hand it back over to Richard, and we're going to talk a little bit about a summary from Michelle's perspective on this ROI and finish up our presentation.
Thanks, Joshua. Yeah, the whole story here is really Michelle's story, because by utilizing our services, she's in fact, had a very significant change in her business. So I'm going to summarize on her behalf and say that even though we've talked at you a lot, we're hoping that by summarizing Central Avenue's situation, it will help cement the return on investment in these tools. So a very conservative estimate is that Michelle saved 26 hours per month. If you're like Michelle and doing a lot of the work yourself, you can easily determine what that's worth by taking revenue divided by your working hours. And while her number might be different than yours, it's important to know it. So if that works out to $100 an hour, then saving 26 hours a month is like saving about $31,000 a year. So truly realizing the value of your time can help you determine when and why it's worth it to pay others or buy tools for certain tasks. Equally important is the time saved offered Michelle more brain space to spend on more valuable tasks. So as an example, in early 2020, pre-pandemic, she noticed the use of TikTok as a way of selling or discussing books. Now, perhaps she had the time to notice and act on this because a year previous, she offloaded a good portion of the time and worry she spent on managing royalties. By offloading stressful or time-consuming technical jobs, we gain time to be more creative and strategic. So Michelle's risk exposure was vastly decreased by knowing all revenue that accounts for the correct royalty payments, that all demand was being filled by, due to increased availability with distribution, and that she was able to exploit the algorithms of online booksellers with good and fast metadata. So moving back to the TikTok example, in late 2020, sales started skyrocketing because of some viral posts, but Michelle didn't have to worry about the supply chain issues that others were having with POD because she had a warehouse full of books. And with her distributor's help, she was able to prioritize shipments to certain stores and get more printed and shipped quickly. At the same time, she was making fast changes to those books' metadata. All this really is about the snowball effect. One thing happens to get the ball rolling, and then the other systems that have been put in place make sure it keeps rolling and getting bigger. So let's talk about increased sales. This slide symbolizes Central Avenue's annual sales over the last 7 years, with indicators showing where tools were added. So aside from the dip in 2018 and 19 due to selling a major portion of her backlist to another publisher, her sales continued to increase above industry averages. The bump in sales over the last 2 years has been in part because of viral posts, but it's been because of other things too, like more and better acquisitions and fiction titles that have performed better than 2 years ago because Michelle gained more time to initiate effective marketing campaigns. But maybe the reason for higher sales is that Central Avenue made better decisions because Michelle eliminated worry about being sued over incorrect royalty statements, or the long hours it took to pack up boxes of books from her garage, or the time it took to maintain 8 different spreadsheets and web forms. So there is an old saying accredited to the Roman poet Plautus: you must spend money to make money. It can be difficult to make investments now, but if you do, you're setting yourself up for future success. So thank you all for joining us today. And I think we still have a couple of minutes for questions.
Thank you guys very much for that very informative presentation. And we do indeed, if any of you have any questions or comments that you'd like to share with David, Joshua, or Richard, please feel free to put those in the questions area or the chat area. And I'll give you a minute or so to do that. I'm sad that Michelle was not able to join us, but I appreciate that you, the three of you, were able to incorporate her insights and her experience into the presentation. So often webinars are a lot of information going in, but not necessarily strong on how does this actually apply to my business. And I definitely feel Michelle's absence, but appreciate her her honesty and her support in letting you share her comments about how addressing some of these ROI issues have changed her business for the better. David, Joshua, Richard, thank you. I don't see any questions or any comments that folks have, so I'm going to assume that we are in the clear, and you provided a lot of information that people are still probably processing and want to share with other members in their teams, in their staff, and in their groups, and may have some questions later. On that note, to those who are participating, if you do have any questions, please feel free to direct them directly to David, Joshua, and Richard at the email addresses that you can see on this last slide, or you can always send them to me and I'd be happy to pass them on. Last things last, a video of this webinar will be available online probably within the next hour or two at the ACP website under webinars, and also at the ACP channel on YouTube. We welcome you to come and to view it again, pass it on to others, and kind of share the wealth of this information. With that, I want to thank David, Joshua, and Richard once again, and thank you all for attending. We look forward to seeing you at our next ACP webinar, which will be on the 27th, and on outside fulfillment. So if you have those issues or some questions or concerns about that, please consider registering for that. Again, you will get some emails in the next couple of weeks about that. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay.